iPad charger. Yes. Oh, look at that. Jakari got it. Thanks, Jakari. Cool stuff. Okay. So home front reading and questions. Let's go over this real quick. Hey, I want to try and get through the last one. I got a short video for you towards the end, and maybe you'll have some time on your own. How cool will that be? Let's go over this reading real quick. This is from Friday, Victory Gardens. We already know what they are, but let's go over. All right, number one. What was a victory garden? What was it? Go ahead, Haley Ryder.
It was a source for, or it was like a food source for the front.
Okay, all right, yeah, good job. So this was a way to try to promote the soldiers overseas by growing as much crops as possible at home and making sure that no food goes to waste. Okay, same thing with World War I. A very similar thing. Good. Two, why did people grow them during World War II? All right, I kind of gave this one away. Lentz, what do you have for two?
So they can make up the food that they're selling to the troops.
Yeah, good job. So all the resources, all the supplies, food, you name it, everything going overseas to help benefit the war effort and our troops or soldiers. And now we're fighting in two fronts, in Europe and now in Pacific. And how do you keep that food preserved? Right, it's going to be tough to do, especially with the humidity and the temperature differences. Right, and especially out in the Pacific Theater in those islands and these tropical locations, it's gonna be hard to do. So many of these people were advised to grow their food at home. Okay, be almost self-sufficient in a way, and American people did that pretty well. Good. And as you can see, these propaganda pieces over here, maybe one here just maybe put in newspapers or local areas and community centers to try to promote these victory gardens. Making cartoons as well, like this, to try to make sure that the children, the youth, understand it as much as the adults. Okay, it's very important that I try to preserve as much food as possible. 4, how the government encouraged people to grow these gardens. Kind of gave that one away. Autumn, what do you have for 4? Sorry about that. Do you have? Did I skip one?
No, I did.
Oh, you know what? Sorry, I missed 3. So let's go to 3. How about you answer 3? About how much of the nation's vegetables were produced by victory gardens? 40%. Look at that. Okay, look at that. That's amazing. Right, that's a lot of people growing food, this food supply to help us win this war. And like I mentioned before, one of the biggest assets for the United States is our home front, right? Our industrial power. Okay, our food growth. Right? We have a lot of resources and materials, and really, we're untouched by the war. Okay, yeah, Pearl Harbor, we got attacked there, but that was this military base, this island out in the Pacific Ocean. For the most part, continental United States was untouched. Our industries could keep producing products and finalized goods, and at the same time, we could grow as much food as possible at the same time. So really, that's what won us this war. All right, 4, how did the government encourage people to grow these gardens? Go ahead, Angel.
Creating propaganda and stories about victory gardens and articles.
Awesome, good job. Yeah, so propaganda, so pictures, okay, cartoons, political cartoons, radio broadcasts. Okay, there's all these different sources of media that were used to try to help promote the home front, okay, and especially these victory gardens. Right, newspaper articles, community centers with posters, oh, you name it, everything under the sun. Okay, good, awesome. All right, document 5, roles of the minorities during World War II. Number 1, how did minorities' role change during World War II? What do we have here? Haley Ryder, go ahead.
They created more jobs and opened more opportunities up for them.
Yeah, good job. So all across the United States, we talked about some of these New Deal agencies like the TVA helping produce electricity and power generation to the southeast United States in these remote locations. Hoover Dam out in the southwest United States trying to inspire industrialization there, and it worked. Okay, there's a lot of factories, a lot of different businesses, jobs, creation, you name it, all across the U.S. that we've never really seen before. Okay, and this is when we really see the U.S. shifting towards this industrial power, the number 1 in the world. Okay, yeah, during World War I, we were rising to that level. We're right neck and neck with other countries. But here's where we're going to take full stride. and take the lead. Awesome. Good job. Good job. So, yeah, jobs. Okay. Filling the jobs. And we'll talk about the Tuskegee Airmen here soon. African American group that came together and learned dogfighting and learned the ways of aviation. It was amazing. Okay. All these immigrant groups and different ethnicities, racial groups coming together to try to help the United States win this war against fascism in Europe, right? Against the Imperial Japan out in the Pacific. Awesome. 2, name 3 minority groups who aided in the war effort during World War II. What do we have here for number 2? What do we got here? Ethan, what do you have? Yep, good job. So Native Americans, African Americans, and yep, good job. Good job. And Mexican Americans. Good job. So with that, okay, we had all these immigrant groups coming together, like I said, ethnic groups, racial groups coming together in the U.S., and we'll talk about these Navajo code talkers with the Native Americans and how this code and this language was being used to try to really give out different types of clues and hints and decoding and making sure that these codes were kept secret from the Japanese and even out over in Europe against the Germans. Okay, this Native American language was used heavily to try to hide different transmissions, different codes and strategies and plans going across the radio waves, right? Going across the broadcasts. And it was interesting how we could use that, okay, because this is a language that was in the United States and America, okay, for a long, long, long time. And we could use that language to help us win this war. And it's interesting. We'll talk about that a little bit later, the Navajo code talkers. All right, number 3, how are these minority groups treated? What do we have for number 3? What do we have? Alyssa, what do you have for 3? Yeah, a lot of prejudice, okay, in the United States. Even though the benefit, the help, the aid that they obviously these groups benefit the U.S. to win this war, still after the war, which we'll get to, the civil rights movement trying to help alleviate some of these issues and problems in the United States, still after, World War I, World War II, okay, and a lot of the help and progress we see there. There's still a lot of things that U.S. can improve on, and segregation still a thing in the South, and with the Jim Crow laws, and it's unfortunate, sad thing that it couldn't have ended way before this, but okay, it's still going on during World War II. All right, is there any questions on that, guys? You good? So make sure you turn that in. If you didn't turn it in, it was due at the start of class, but I'll give you partial credit if you turn it in now. It's better than nothing. All right, so bell ringer for today. Here we go. So we got, describe the Baton Death March and the fall of the Philippines at the start of World War II. There we have it. I think everybody can see it okay there. What's up, Chris?
Were you supposed to show your bell ringers
I'll check them. How about you just put them on the post then from Friday, and I'll check them. Like I said, I try to get to them every week, but sometimes it doesn't happen.
There's only 3, right?
I believe there's only 3. Yeah, I believe so. All right, the Baton Death March and the fall of Philippines, start of World War II. There we go. What do we have for current events in here for first period? What did I say? You, Angel? Okay, that's what I thought. Just making sure. And you're good for Friday, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll remind you throughout the week. But if you forget, make sure you check up here, and you'll see her.
Yeah.
I guess I can throw the shamrock away. Oh, still get some shamrock shakes though, maybe. What's up?
To put them on the phone, we have to unsubmit.
Ooh, okay. How about you just hold on to them then? Hold on to them. He said it'd be a good study tool for you. I can add the 3 points onto it then in Sapphire. How does that work?
Like, I know I did it, but
Yeah,
like I add, once you add them, you have to resubmit it.
I got you. Understandable. I'll just add them on to. No worries. All right, so fall of the Philippines. When did that happen? When did that occur? What do we have for this one here? When did the fall of Philippines happen? Lentz, what do you have, buddy? When did the fall of the Philippines happen? When did that occur? When was it?
1941.
Okay, all right. So it's happening right around there, 1941. Officially occurred 1942. So 1941, 1942. All right, good job, good job. So the fall of the Philippines, who was the main man in charge for the Allied powers of the United States during that time? And it's in the Pacific Theater. Remember, he had the sunglasses on. He had the cornstalk pipe, really, as a picture of him. I can maybe bring that up towards the end of class to show you. Do you remember his name? It's one of your vocab terms.
He's the guy who says the Terminator.
The Terminator, yep, good, good. I'm glad you remember that part. Should I bounce it to someone else, or are you good?
Douglas MacArthur.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Douglas MacArthur, good work. He is the Supreme Commander of the Pacific Theater. When we talk about island hopping, okay, when the United States is pushing back the Japanese forces out of these islands in the Pacific back to their main borders, he's the man in charge. Okay, we'll talk about Nimitz as well, right, and how he was a significant impact general during that time as well. But for the most part, we're going to focus on Douglas MacArthur, okay, and his advancement in the Pacific. But this doesn't look too good, right? 1941, 1942, what happened? Well, you know, it's the fall of the Philippines. So when did we acquire the Philippines again? Just reviewing back to chapter 2. When did that happen? Go ahead, Jakari.
At the end of the Spanish.
Yeah, Spanish-American War, good job. So we utilized it as a military base and extracting resources. Right? We know the Philippines right here, guys. Okay. These islands right here. Okay, out here in Southeast Asia. So we acquired that for a long, long time. 1902-ish, right? 1900s, right? When we won that Spanish-American War, the splendid little war. Okay, but what happened here? So the fall of the Philippines, kind of dead giveaway. What occurred? What happened? So previous to this, we know that Pearl Harbor happened. That occurred, and what went on, Jakari?
Japan invaded, took it over.
Pushed us out, right? Real quick. Okay, real quick. So our military wasn't really advanced at that time. Okay, especially out in the Philippines here. A lot of our naval superiority was at Pearl Harbor. It got destroyed within a couple of hours, about 2 hours or so. And we really weren't prepared for this invasion of this island, the Philippines. And yeah, Imperial Japan was expanding a lot in Southeast Asia and all throughout what we know as China, modern day Vietnam, Korean Peninsula, you name it. And it was just kind of, it was sooner or later that the Imperial Japan was going to take over the Philippines. And it happened. It occurred. Okay. And MacArthur, before he went back down to Australia, which was a territory owned by who? Who owned Australia? The land down under? Go ahead, Chris. Great Britain. Good job. All right. So some head officials evacuated down to Australia to get away from the Japanese advancement there. And what occurred? How many POWs? How many people surrendered to the United States and the Filipino army? What was that number? Do you guys remember? Okay, yeah, around 60,000, right? 70,000, 60,000. Good job. Okay, there was a lot of soldiers that had to surrender and become prisoner of war. And it was one of the biggest defeats of World War II, actually almost ever in the United States, where we had to surrender the island. Many of these POWs were forced to these labor camps. All right, what was the Baton Death March? Who wants to describe that for me? This is a sad time in American history and World War II in general. What occurred here? It's Baton Death March. Jakari, go ahead.
The Filipino and American troops were forced to march over 60 miles. 7,000 people died.
Yeah, all right, good job. Yes, with the Baton Death March, Japanese forcing these people, it was called like a sun torture in a way, because it was so tropical, so hot there, forced these American troops, prisoners of war, to march in the sun for over 60, 70 miles, okay? And there was no shade this whole way, and they didn't allow them to rest whatsoever. If an American POW fell, what would happen to him? If he fell to the ground, if he collapsed, what would occur? Jakari? They would decapitate him, they would stab him with a bayonet, whatever it might be. Okay, kill him, right on the spot. And that was the way to try to prove the American POWs as an example. Is like, hey, if you're weak and if you fall over, you're dead. Okay, you got to continue to march. All right, you got to show strength in times of despair. And if let's say an American soldier fell, a POW, and one of them tried to help him up, what would happen to that man that was trying to help him up? What would they do to them? Yeah, they would kill him, stab him with a bayonet, or they would really just make an example of that man as well. It's like, hey, if he's too weak to continue on, you shouldn't stop your march to try to help this person out. It's survival of the fittest. The strongest will survive, and you can't help out the weak and the people that fall in these situations. And we know that the terrible atmosphere, the environment, how hot and humid this temperature environment was. And these men didn't have food or water. Marched for around 9 to 10 days without food or water. Can you imagine that? 60 miles is unbelievable. And we know the Japanese would do some terrible things as these troops were marching this far distances in these tropical locations like the Philippines. Okay, and as they were walking, they would stab them in the legs with bayonets, or they would really just swing at them with their swords to try to. It was almost like a game to them, a torture game for the Japanese to these American POWs, to try to keep them marching and then might make an example of them as they're taken prisoner. Some cases using these different types of armored vehicles, running into the line of the people marching and running them over, killing them to death, and just destroy. It was just a terrible, terrible act, and a lot of this information is being sent back to the United States, and this is creating a larger enemy of the Japanese. We all know what happened with Pearl Harbor. Instantly, right after this, the Philippines, fall of Philippines, and Baton Death March, and we know we're at war. We need to step up. Okay, we need to step up. It's not looking too good for the United States right now. 1941, 1942. Okay, is there any questions on that? You guys good? All right, so real quick, I want to go over this. Terms for today. Doolittle Raids and Battle of Coral Sea. There you go, just these two. I can try to zoom in as much as I can. There you go. So Doolittle Raids, Battle of Coral Sea. What's up?
I won't be here
Tomorrow. Okay. Okay, the SAT. Anybody else taking the SAT in here? Chris? All right. All right. Just check on the announcement then. I'll have the lesson link there. All right. Guys, good with this here. So Doolittle Raids. What were they? What do you have for the Doolittle Raids? What do we have here? What do we have? Alyssa, what do you have for the Doolittle Raids?
An air raid by the U.S. on Midway.
Yeah, good job. Good job. So right after Pearl Harbor, right after the fall of the Philippines, the United States wanted to try to do something to try to get back at Japan, okay, to really stick it to them. It was almost like a revenge, an act of revenge. And this was an attack on Tokyo. Tokyo is the capital of Japan. Now, we'll talk about this more in detail today, but this was an attack of some bomber planes that were launched off an aircraft carrier that were not designed to launch off an aircraft carrier to fly across the part of the Pacific here, around 600, 450, 500 miles to destroy Tokyo with fire bombs, okay, incendiary bombs. And once they leave that bombing run, they're supposed to land in China, parts of the Soviet Union. And this was a daring, daring attack. Okay, very daring attack. All right, so we'll talk about that more today. Right, but this was a way the United States could get back at Japan, where they're bombing at Pearl Harbor, lost to the Philippines, and this was a way to try to inspire the United States that, hey, we can attack them, that Japan is not invincible. All right, Battle of Coral Sea. What do we have here? Andrew, what do you have for the Battle of Coral Sea?
I had the Battle of Coral Sea lasted from May 4th to May 8th of 1942 and was a major naval battle between the Imperial Japanese Navy and Naval and Air Forces of the United States and Australia.
Good job. So Coral Sea, guys, right here, located right here on the map. You can see it. Okay, right off the coast of Australia, moving up into the Pacific Ocean. You guys got that? All right, so that's where Coral Sea is located. That's where mostly this battle is fought. And we'll talk about it more today, but this was, I wouldn't say it was a clear victor, a clear winner, but we stopped the advancement of the Japanese here. And this was the first time in the Pacific Theater in 1942 where we stopped Japan from advancing and really taking hold of these island nations. And their goal was to take over New Guinea. Now, this is this island right here in Indonesia. They wanted to try to invade it and take it over, but we had a different plan. We had a different strategy here to prevent them from moving closer and closer to Australia. If they take that, there's really no Allied possession here in Asia. Okay, so we need to try to make sure they didn't take over any more of these islands and stretch their imperialistic control. I'll mention more about that here soon. Okay, here we go. You guys see the movie Midway? It came out last year, I believe. Started last year, like around January, maybe February, before COVID happened and everything. The Battle of Midway talks about the Dolittle Raids, and it really explains how significant of an event it really was and how daring it was, okay? And how it was really a significant event that tried to turn the tide in the Pacific Theater. All right, so we talked about the Baton Death March. Terrible thing happened there. 7,000 American POWs and Filipino troops died, right? And with that being said, by 1941, closing in on 1942, it looked like Japan was a dominant threat, one that couldn't be stopped, that their imperial reign would continue to stretch and overtake many of these islands out in the Pacific. It was up to the United States to stop them. Okay, we know we were going through a depression. We didn't really have a strong military. Our naval fleet had been impacted pretty hard and destroyed. So we need to try to stop this advancement as quick as we can. And it was really a hard task to do, especially fighting out in the Pacific. We weren't prepared for this style of fighting. All right, so America strikes back. So Colonel James Doolittle, he was a very, I guess you could say, daring, riskful man. Okay, he led this attack on Tokyo, this bombing run on Tokyo to try to get back at Japan. This really was a revenge attack, a revenge strategy. And he had 16 B-25 bombers that were launching off an aircraft carrier. Right, we know these smaller planes, these planes that are used in dogfights, right? We already went over what dogfights are. What are dogfights again? Chris, do you remember? What are dogfights? Remember the movie Fly Boys we watched in World War I? Okay, this was really just aerial combat, plane versus plane. Okay, really no bombers at this time, but just plane versus plane. So these aircraft carriers were really only equipped for these dogfighters to take off of them, not bombers, right? We know that bombers are heavy. Okay, they have a lot of bombs obviously on the plane, and it's going to be difficult for them to launch off these aircraft carriers. And Doolittle tried this daring thing with 16 bombers to try to launch off these aircraft carriers. And as this aircraft carriers get as close as they could to the island of Japan. And Japan, did they have a navy to just sneeze about? No, their navy was pretty strong, right, Lance?
Yeah.
Heck yeah, right? So with this aircraft carrier, they're trying to get as close as they could to the island of Japan and send out these these B-25 bombers off the aircraft carrier to send an attack on Tokyo. That's one daring mission, especially because Japan's naval superiority. So this aircraft carrier is heading out as far as they could, as close as they could to the island of Japan, and then they'll send off the B-25 bombers once they see an approachment of a Japanese vessel. So their goal was to get in within 300 miles of the island of Japan. You know, with these bombers, they take up a lot of fuel. They take up a lot of a lot of gas. It's going to be hard for them to fly across this long distance. And as they're getting closer and closer to the island of Japan, around 600 miles out, they wanted to try to get to around 400 miles. But 600 miles out, they're met with a Japanese ship. Okay, many people think it was just a boat, like a fisherman boat, but you didn't know what it was. So Doolittle, it's like, hey, it's do or die now. We have to send out on this mission. We're not turning back now. So around 600, 500 miles out, they launched these B-25 bombers off the aircraft carrier, hoping that they wouldn't splash right in the water because they had so many bombs. It was so heavy of a plane to launch off an aircraft carrier. It wasn't designed to be launched off an aircraft carrier. So once they launched off about 506 miles off, okay, luckily they all got up in the air, these 16 bombers. And as they're traveling 600 miles, it was a risk because you never know when your gas, your fuel was going to run out. Okay, they never knew what was going to happen. And let's face it, if they would land in Japan, what would happen? Oh, they'd be killed. A lot of these men would be tortured. Okay, especially trying to attack the capital city of Tokyo. So as they're flying across this part of the Pacific, closer and closer to Tokyo, they actually reach their mark and drop these incendiary bombs. And main thing to remember about Tokyo, guys, is a lot of these buildings, a lot of these homes, a lot of the industrial areas within Tokyo, it was all made of wood, right? All made of wood. It really wasn't made out of steel or any types of metals like that because it was a hard resource to get their hands on. So what do you think happened when these fire bombs hit Tokyo? Everything burned up in flames. Everything. Okay, everything. And we'll talk about the Tokyo fire raids a little bit later, but this was the first attack America placed on Japan, the Dolittle Raids in 1942. Okay, with little to no fuel. Okay, traveling over 600 miles in these B-25 planes, these bombers, launching off an aircraft carrier, hoping that they just wouldn't fall and sink into the water. And it was a very successful run. Okay, this hit the heart of Japan, Tokyo, the capital of Japan. We struck them within not even a year after Pearl Harbor happened. So these American people were like, you know what? We can hit them. We can launch an attack on Japan. We're showing that they're not invincible, that they're not unstoppable. Okay, and many of the bombers actually made it to part of China, the coast of China. But what's one thing here, landing on the coast of China? Who controlled that? Japan, right? Japan did. So it was a really daring mission because once they landed, because they ran out of fuel, a lot of these planes kind of dive bombed out. They had to parachute out of the plane. That was the next risk, getting home. How are they going to get home from this? Especially landing in Japanese-controlled territory. One of the planes actually landed in the Soviet Union, which the Soviet Union was an ally. So luckily, but many of these soldiers that landed, especially Doolittle, had to try to evade the Japanese controlled territory. And I believe only one squadron, one fighter plane actually died. Okay, the troops, the soldiers on this plane died. The rest of them got home safe. Right? But this led to an increased attack of the Japanese onto the Chinese people. Okay, we'll talk about some of the atrocities that they performed on these Chinese people, killing many of their civilians, okay, killing many of the children, women, you name it, because of this bomb on Tokyo, and that the Chinese people were trying to hide the American pilots from them. Okay, again, this is an attack on the capital of Japan. Make sure you guys remember that with the Doolittle raids. All right, the last thing, real quick, I want to cover over it. Battle of Coral Sea. Battle of Coral Sea. This was the first ever attack, make sure you guys write this down, first ever battle of aircraft carrier versus aircraft carrier out in the open water. Okay, aircraft carrier versus aircraft carrier. That means they're launching these planes off the aircraft carriers. and fighting up in the air, dogfights, battleships fighting out in the open water. This is the first time ever in world history that this occurred. So the Battle of Coral Sea, the Japanese mission, their planned strategy was try to take over New Guinea. Okay, New Guinea's right here, guys, this island, right off the coast of Australia. We know Great Britain controlled Australia. If Japan took over the rest of these lands here in Southeast Asia, sooner or later, right, they're going to continue to move on closer and closer to the western coast of the United States. So it was a main goal to make sure that the Allies had a base, had an area to control, had troops over in Southeast Asia. So the Battle of Coral Sea happened right out here. Okay, obviously Coral Sea, even moving up into the Pacific to try to prevent the Japanese invasion of New Guinea. And it worked. There was no clear victor, but the United States stopped the invasion of the Japanese military onto New Guinea. So in a way, I guess you'd say the victors were the United States. Okay, this was stepping up to the turning point in the Pacific for the U.S. But we all can see that the Battle of Coral Sea was a shift of momentum. And it showed the United States that we can adapt to this new style of warfare, this new style of battle out in the Pacific with aircraft carriers fighting up in the air over the open water with these airplanes. And the Doolittle Raids obviously helped out, significant event to try to get back at Japan, revenge, and showing the American people that we can attack them at any point. And this will be the first attack on Tokyo. We'll talk about some of these fire raids, which many consider to be even more impactful and more devastating and killed many more people than the atomic bombs itself. Okay? Just constant incendiary fire bombs onto the capital city of Tokyo. All right, so this is what a B-52 looks like. Sorry, B-25 bomber. Like I said, that's going to be hard to launch off an aircraft carrier, but they successfully did it. Especially loaded up with bombs. Okay, is there any questions? You guys good with that? All right, that's all I got for today. I was going to show you a video here, but check it out on your own. Talks about the Doolittle Raids. Okay, I'll show that here, right here. Talks about the Doolittle Raids, and this is a clip from the movie Midway. Kind of puts it more in perspective of the raid itself and how they destroyed, not destroyed much of Tokyo, but how they really bombed Tokyo, the capital of Japan. All right, there you go.